Be more educated on our candidates. So anyway, so welcome to our pilot. We're also doing, this is for Legislative District 10, the primary. We're doing one at Sarita High School on Wednesday and at Empire High School on Thursday. Now the Vail School District has already started school, so we're going to have a lot more student participation at that one. So anyway, we do have 4 state representative candidates for the Democrats, the Democratic Party, I'm sorry, and the moderator is going to come up here. I just wanted to welcome you and see you back here for our general election debate. I don't really know the date, but I'm sure our Clean Election staff back here can tell you. You can also register to vote with them. So if you haven't registered to vote, you can do that as well. Thank you.
All right, thank you, and good evening, everyone. My name is Ben Giles. I'll be your moderator for the evening, and welcome to the Legislative District 10 Clean Elections primary debate. I am full-time a reporter for the Arizona Capital Times. A little bit about our newspaper. Thank you. We're a great source of political news coverage in the state of Arizona. We closely watch the governor's office, state agencies, and most of all, the legislative process, which includes elections like this one. Before we begin, I do have just a couple of requests for the audience. If you haven't yet, please silence all your cell phones and other electronic devices, and please refrain from any interruptions during the debate. This is being recorded for those who'd like to watch later, and it's also being recorded for post-captioning services, so a few interruptions will allow a more smoother process for that. I also have a little bit to tell you about our host tonight, the Arizona Citizen Clean Elections Commission. The Clean Elections Act is a campaign finance reform and voter education measure that was initiated by Arizona citizens and passed by voters in 1998. As part of its role, Clean Elections provides clean funding for qualified participating candidates who agree to abide by the Clean Elections Act and rules. Those rules include contribution and spending limits on their campaigns, foregoing special interest money, and participating in debates such as this one. We want you, the audience, to ask questions tonight. I've already got a ton of note cards from the audience, so thank you for that. If you haven't had a chance to fill out a note card, just please raise your hand and ask one of the staffers who are milling about. They can give you a card. They can pick up a card you've already filled out. They'll bring it up to me, and that's what's going to drive the discussion tonight, the questions you folks have. We've scheduled at least an hour for this debate, no more than an hour and a half. During the first half, I'll be asking questions of all of our Democratic candidates on the panel. They'll each have a minute to answer those questions, and we'll just take turns who gets to answer first. During the second half of the debate is an opportunity for you to ask specific questions of individual candidates. So if you'd like to ask, say, Catherine, a specific question, just please write her name on the card. That way when I receive it, I'll know who to direct it to. During that time, candidates will also allow someone who'd like to chime in with their 2 cents on a question about 30 seconds to respond. We'll also finish up with closing remarks, 2 minutes each for our candidates. So again, last call, well, not last call for questions throughout the debate. If you have something that you'd like to ask and still need a card, just please raise your hand. We'll get one to you. I should note, we do screen those questions just for clarity, and mostly to ensure that we're not asking questions twice. And we're also looking for questions, not speeches or accusations or any sort of personal attack on the candidates, so we won't be using those. Please remain polite to all the candidates. Please give them a fair and uninterrupted debate. And let's get started with that, with opening statements. We'll go with you.
Thank you to Clean Elections, and thanks to all of you for coming out. My name is Domine de Gracia. I am a Democratic candidate for Arizona Legislature in District 10. By way of introduction, my dad was the artist Ted de Gracia of the Gallery in the Sun fame. My mom is a former special education teacher up on the San Carlos Reservation, and she's also a former cultural liaison to the University of Arizona Medical Center. My parents kind of collectively passed to me what I call a couple of gifts. One of those is the constant drive to better myself and to learn. Another is the creativity to find my own way, and the tenacity to see a fight through all the way to the end. I spend my days defending Arizonans against the overreach of our state government. And what that means generally is that I represent kids and families in DCS cases in both state court and on appeals. And it's kind of a convoluted way of saying what I really do, which is what I help people when they need help. If a young mother doesn't have resources to take care of a child, if someone is struggling with mental health issues or substance abuse issue, or if a family is needing assistance with caring for a kinship placement, my job is to step in and find those folks help. And that's a large part of why I'm running for office, because I've seen how Arizona has failed our children. I've seen how Arizona has failed families. I know what needs to be changed, and I know how to make that change. I've spent the last 12 years in the courts fighting for Arizona families, and largely what I would like to do is focus on kids and families and the changes that need to be made. There's only so much that one person can do, one attorney can do, fighting for families one at a time. Real change has to come at the legislative level. I'm uniquely poised to make that happen. I have the knowledge and experience, and I'm asking for you to send me to the legislature to fight for Arizona families. Thank you.
Thank you. Kirsten?
Good evening, and thanks to all of you for coming out, and thanks to the Clean Elections for sponsoring this debate. I'm very proud of my service in the legislature, and I hope during the course of this debate to tell you a bit about my accomplishments. But I want to say that my very proudest moment occurred not in debating a bill in committee or on a final read of a bill on the House floor, but as a mother of a Tucson public school student and as a teacher in one of Arizona's finest universities, standing side by side with the 50,000 teachers and educators who marched on the Capitol for Red for Ed, demanding decent wages to pull us out of last place in teacher salaries. That moment transformed the school funding debate this past year. I realize that not every issue is going to motivate tens of thousands of people to march on the Capitol. That's why we have legislators, to be our voice up there in Phoenix. I have been that voice. I would like to continue to be that voice so I can continue to fight for you. Tucson voters want results. I worked across the aisle on some of the toughest issues facing Arizona. My name is Kirsten Engel. I'm asking for your vote so we can make the state of Arizona a national leader in education, the economy, and the environment. Thank you.
Thank you. Nikki.
Hi, good evening, everyone. Thanks to Ben, Saguaro High School, and the Clean Elections Commission for hosting this debate in the wonderful air conditioning. My name's Nikki Lee. I am a Clean Elections candidate for the state representative position here in Legislative District 10. A little bit about me, I'm an Air Force veteran. I came here to Tucson about 15 years ago with the Air Force. I am a technology professional, and I'm a mom of 3 kiddos, all school-aged kids. 2017, in the 2017 legislative session, SB 1431 happened, which a lot of you will associate with Save Our Schools. It was the voucher expansion bill that went through. And that's when I really got involved in and woke up on education issues in Arizona. I was a region lead for Save Our Schools here in the eastern half of Tucson and helped organize signature gatherers so that we were able to refer SB 1431 to the ballot, which is now Prop 305, and I'll do my plug that we want everyone to vote no on Prop 305 in November. That experience, coupled with my service in the military, coupled with the division in our country following the 2016 election, I knew that I had to get involved somehow. And I looked at the landscape and I saw an opportunity to serve here in the state of Arizona, and that's what I intend to do so. In terms of platform, and we'll be talking a lot about this tonight, education is a top focus for me, as is healthcare, the economy, veterans issues, and the environment. specifically on veterans issues, we lose about 22, I've heard Kat say 26, too many veterans every day to suicide in this country. So whatever we can do at the state level to support addressing veteran suicide, I'm a huge advocate for. So I look forward to learning more about everyone tonight and talking about these issues. And again, my name is Nikki Lee for State Rep in LD 10. Thank you.
Thank you, Nikki. And Catherine.
Thank you. Thank you to the Arizona Clean Election Commission. Ben, thank you, and Saguaro High School for supporting us and for hosting this tonight. For most of history, Anonymous was a woman. Virginia Woolf said that about 100 years ago. And we've come a long way as women, as immigrants, as people, as humans, right? We began with the words, "We the people," and all men are created equal, truth, justice, liberty. And yet, 240 years later, we're still marching for our lives. We're marching Red for Ed for teachers to make a living wage. We're marching for the Me Too movement so that women can have the courage and the platform to stand up to sexual violence. We're marching for science, for God's sake. We're marching for immigrant women and their children crawling across the border just to escape us and to get asylum from torturous and dangerous countries. We're fighting in Arizona now, the state legislature, just to get a seat at the table to even talk about those issues. I'm Catherine Ripley. I'm running for the Arizona State Legislature. I'm the daughter of an immigrant from Japan. My father was a veteran in World War II. I'm the sister to 2 strong women. I'm the mother to 2 amazing grown children. I'm a teacher. I'm a former naval officer, former diplomat, and I'm here to try to make a difference. I'd like to apply my ambassadorial skills of listening, of diplomacy, of making decisions, with my military background, of creating policy and strategy and fighting when necessary if needed. So I'm here today to talk a little bit about the platforms that I represent. Education is my #1 platform. Gun policy I feel extremely strong about, and I have a lot of strategies and plans in place for that I would love to share. And obviously, the immigration system, the immigration policies that have been happening over the last couple months gets me emotional, and we really need to work on those as well. My last issue. Thank you.
All right. Thank you, Catherine. So our first question, we'll start with Kirsten, and we'll just work our way down. Kirsten, as you mentioned, tens of thousands of teachers protested for higher pay and more education funding this spring. After a budget was passed that did boost pay for teachers and did provide about $100 million more for additional assistance, is more funding still needed for our K-12 public schools? And if so, where do you propose finding the funding for it?
Thank you. Yes, unquestionably. We still have not gotten our schools back up to the levels of funding that they had before the recession. They're missing over $1 billion in funding every year. What the governor did, he did put more money into schools, but a lot of it rests on projections that we don't know whether or not they will come true. It's not enough, and it's certainly not as much as what was promised. We need to continue to work on this to fund our schools. We are still at the bottom of the states in terms of teacher pay and in terms of per student funding. We have a several billion-dollar lawsuit pending against the state of Arizona for failure to invest in our facilities. And like many other legislators, I was able to go on tours of some of our schools, and I saw rooms that were broken down, plumbing that had not been fixed, a lot of facilities that were not in use because physically they're not even safe for our children. We luckily got some money for buses, so that'll be good, but otherwise it's not enough.
All right, thank you.
Didn't get to talk about, hopefully next time, talk about where to get that money.
Plenty more to talk about education, don't worry. Next up is Nikki.
Yes, I absolutely agree with Representative Engel. We need to get back to those pre-recession funding levels and more because inflation. And I think one of the big ways we can do that is looking at corporate sales tax loopholes. I know that Labor has recently, they have an upcoming workshop, I believe on the 31st, where they're going to deconstruct 300 or so of these different corporate sales tax loopholes. And a lot of these are not providing the return on investment that make them worth keeping. We could cut out several of those strategic ones and funnel that money right back into education. And I have to do this, another plug for you guys. Also, we have to vote no on Prop 305. That's another way to make sure that we're not going to have millions of dollars of money coming out of our public funding and going into private businesses.
All right, thank you. Catherine.
Yes, so thank you. I totally, of course, agree with my esteemed colleagues. We need to get the funding back. Billions of dollars have been lost since the recession, and billions of dollars also have been used for tax exemptions in corporations, at least $2 billion that I know of. So I think getting rid of the corporate tax exemptions, like Nikki said, is a step. Saying no to Prop 305, capping the STOs. There's a lot of other ways. This is a big problem. There's a lot of money to get back into this fund, to fully fund education to where it was pre-recession and to where it should be today based on inflation. Is going to take a lot of number crunching. It's going to take a lot of creativity, and it's not going to come from one bucket of money. There's a lot of creative ways. Getting money from the lottery. That money from the lottery should have been going to education. There's a lot of tax loopholes that we can look at that should be sunsetted. You know, get rid of those. Look at the ones that don't make sense anymore. There should be a comprehensive, complete, and total look at this from a committee of people and not just by piecemeal legislation. I think we can do this if everybody goes hand in hand to work on a complete solution. Thank you.
Domingo.
Public education is tremendously underfunded, and we do need to invest in it. We have a moral obligation to properly fund public education, because the children that are going through school now, they're going to be the future of our state. We do have several options to make this happen, to put public education funding back to where it should be, back to pre-recession levels and what the teachers and students need now. One of the options that's always talked about is going back through the corporate tax, either incentives or giveaways, reassessing those to determine whether they are in alignment with the values that Arizonans hold today. Some of these incentives are very old. Another way to look at funding is, obviously, we need to vote no on Prop 305, make sure that money stays where it is. But in balancing our medical costs with our education costs, we can also float the idea of a tax and let the voters of Arizona decide whether that tax is something that we want as an investment in Arizona's future. Thank you.
All right. So this next question, all of you hit on an answer to this kind of a little bit, but let's get a little bit more time in to explore what are ways the state can potentially tighten its belt. We always hear down at the Capitol that there's a pie of state funding available to spend on everything from education to public safety to healthcare. We'll start with Nikki. What are some of those ways that the state can spend less? And also, are there other areas, perhaps besides education, where you think the state should be spending more?
Yeah, so I recently went through the Flynn Brown Civic Leadership Academy, which was an amazing opportunity to really dig in at a super deep level on a lot of issues that we have across Arizona, and talking to heads of departments, of our health department, transportation department. And the consensus that I got out of that is that everybody's running exceptionally lean, and they've kind of had to cut out a lot of things since the recession. So I don't really see, just from my exposure to these different departments, a ton of fat that can be cut. I think folks are operating in a very efficient manner. I also don't see a lot of areas where I think we need to invest more, except for education as a priority. We are spending a lot of money on our prisoners. And there are some decriminalization things that we should probably look at around marijuana that would free up a lot of money that we could put into education instead of locking people up, that I think we need to look at. But no, I don't really see a lot of fat that can be trimmed from the agencies that I'm aware of.
All right, Catherine.
Yes, thank you. So I think that I would agree with Nikki that there's not a lot of fat, but I would go back to and revert to tax reform. Arizona is one of the worst states in the country to live in terms of taxes, and most unfair in our country. So I look back at overarching tax reform, looking at corporate taxes, looking at the years since 1990, really, there's been chipping away, I guess, in favor of large corporations and big businesses to the tune of over $2 billion in exemptions like luxury items like private jets and horse vitamins and membership to country clubs. So there's a lot that can be done as far as the budget as a whole is concerned without forcing agencies and organizations that are already working on lean budgets that we can really push for and look at. So I think it would be an overarching tax reform that needs to be conducted at the legislature, which is our job, which will be my job when I win. And I think that that's something that we really need to look at just from an overarching point of view.
Thank you. Domingo.
I've looked at the budget. I've gone through it in as much detail as I think is one person can. I'm not convinced that there's a lot more that we can trim out of the budget, but what we can do is look at our priorities. And as I said, the priorities that Arizonans have in terms of allocations for our budget. We know that the Arizona budget is now back to pre-recession levels, and we know that the landscape of the budget has changed in that education and healthcare take up different proportions of the budget now than they did back in 2007. So one thing to look at is where our money is going to ensure that it's going toward issues or things that are going to benefit Arizonans, but also we need to look at growing our budget and growing Arizona. A prosperous business in Arizona is going to provide a lot of revenue that comes back in. So essentially, we can grow the budget pie and have more money to work with. Thank you.
Kirsten.
Yes, for the most part, I think we should be looking at expanding our revenues rather than tightening our belt. We have $4 billion less in our budget than we did in 1992. So Arizona has been cutting taxes and cutting its budget for years now. And if I can just put in a few of the ideas of how we can fund education, first thing is I'm supporting that Invest in Ed ballot petition. I think it's a fair and equitable way of raising immediate money that we need in our schools through higher income taxes on the wealthiest Arizonans who benefit from our education system. I also think that we can roll back some of the corporate tax cuts that have been reduced since 2011, since we're not getting the benefit that was predicted of that. And I also think now that the Supreme Court has ruled that we can tax online sales, that we should do so, and that that's fair to our own businesses. Why should Wayfair and Overstock.com not have to pay sales taxes, and yet our local home goods and clothing stores have to pay those taxes? I think the place to save money is through the criminal justice system. And looks like I'm going to have to talk about that more later, but we are spending 1/10 of our budget on criminal justice.
Thank you. So for our next question, it seemed like all the candidates in their answers previously agreed that the belt is already pretty tight as far as the state's available finances are concerned, and that there needs to be a boost in funding and increasing of the pie that's available for the state to spend money from. So let's allow for a little bit more follow-up on specific ideas about how do you boost revenue, because in our state, it takes a 2/3 majority vote to increase taxes via the legislature. So often we wind up referring measures to the ballot and letting voters decide. So let's get a little bit more specific, starting with Catherine. What are some ways that you would like to boost revenue for the state?
Well, one of the things that I would look at is increasing the economic growth of Tucson. We should be leading the way in things like solar power and renewable energies. There are several companies that have looked at Tucson to come to grow their businesses, to set up new factories and new buildings and businesses, like Amazon, for instance. And they come here and they don't see a good place for their kids to live, their employees to set up. And I think that we need to start with, I need to hurry up here, we need to start with education, and it's a win-win to make sure that we educate our populace so that Arizona is an attractive place to grow businesses, to get more people to come to live here that need to grow these businesses in order to create more revenue, to create more prosperity, and to create more opportunities. So that's what I would do, is to make this more attractive to live.
So I just want to follow up. There is definitely an argument to be made that improving educational outcomes will be more attractive to businesses in the long term, and that will help boost the state's economy. But in the short term, how would you boost revenue now so that we can put more money into education and start the ball rolling on that long-term effect you described? If you could mention something in 30 seconds.
Well, I mean, there's only one sure way of boosting revenue, and that's taxing. And also cutting the exemptions and the tax cuts for those that don't really need them, like big corporations. The legislature just approved tax exemptions for the coal mining industry, for instance. So I think that looking at tax exemptions and tax cuts, and also looking at the possibility of increasing taxes in several areas, and I think what Kirsten mentioned, I think it was Senate Bill 1392, that introduced the possibility of taxing digital goods and services, which I think should happen.
All right, thank you. Domingo, ways to increase state revenues in the immediate future?
Well, we're either going to do one of two things. We're either going to reallocate the money that we have now, or we're going to bring in new revenue. And the immediate way to do that is through taxation, although that's not immediate. It has to go through the voters. But I tend to look at a longer view of stabilizing Arizona, and the way that we do that to bring in businesses over the long run is, number one, shoring up our public education system so that businesses that come here are going to have a great pool of educated workers. We also need to pay attention to our infrastructure. We already have great geography and great geographic location, so infrastructure is the next task.
All right, Kirsten.
Yes, I guess I sort of jumped ahead in the questions by talking about raising revenue in the short term by the Invest in Ed initiative, in the slightly longer term in rolling back some of those cuts to our corporate income taxes. We have one of the lowest corporate income tax burdens in the country, and it's not clear that we are getting the benefits from that were promised from that rollback. So we've really lost a lot of those corporate taxes. The online taxes I also think is very important. But if I can return to the belt tightening of the corporate justice,
we'll get to that again. We'll get to that at another time. But Nikki.
I am still a fan of looking at those corporate sales tax loopholes. There's over $13 billion of uncollected revenue, and in Arizona right now we have a revenue issue. We need to bring in more revenue. So I am a fan of looking at those. Again, some make sense. They actually help businesses and economy, and we get a return on investment, and some of them don't make sense for us anymore. So I would definitely look there, as well as supporting Invest in Ed to get that immediate influx of money into the system so we can allocate that toward education.
All right, and following up on that, looking at corporate tax exemptions has been pitched by, I think, almost all of our candidates tonight. Are you concerned at all, we'll start with Domingo, about possible side effects of a counter-argument to those exemptions is often driving businesses away from Arizona because those exemptions provide a favorable tax environment in the state. Domingo, do you have any concerns about the side effects? Do you think that would have a detrimental impact on the business community and possibly see people leave the state?
Yeah, we should be concerned about the way that we look at our tax breaks and how corporations will view that, because it is a potential that some corporations could leave the state if they have a different place to go that is more favorable to them. That's the same thing that would apply to any folks that earn over $250,000 a year when this tax gets voted on for Invest in Ed. However, we need to really look at how much we value Arizona, and personally, I hold Arizona to a very high standard, and I think we have some fantastic benefits here that any corporation would be happy to be part of. Not only do we have, as I said, great geography, our great geographic location, we have great climate, we have lots of space, and we have great people here. I don't want to sell Arizona short by giving away a bunch of tax breaks that devalue Arizona. I'd like to say, hey, we are strong, we are smart, we have a lot to offer corporations in a partnership scheme, and we can make this work. And if you want to be here, you're going to contribute to making Arizona great. Thank you.
All right, thank you. Next up is Kirsten.
Yes, that's a concern, but even Governor Brewer said that one of her biggest regrets was actually signing into law those corporate tax breaks. So I don't think that this is something that is necessarily going to scare corporations away. I also think that we have to look at the other side of the coin. You know, who's not coming to Arizona because we're not investing in our education system? So we tend to, you know, every time you mention something like corporate tax rates, people raise the, you know, flag of concern that, you know, corporations are going to run away. But we're not looking at who's not coming to Arizona because we don't have the infrastructure and the school system that people want and a place that people want to live.
Thank you. And next up is Nikki.
Yeah, I typically use the word return on investment every time I talk about these cuts because as a business person, I've got my MBA, I definitely understand business and the money that businesses can put back into the economy, especially our local businesses. So I'm definitely aware and conscious of that. I think each one of those does need to be evaluated. If it's not providing the return on investment, if we're not getting enough revenue back in to justify the costs that we are not collecting that revenue, I think we need to evaluate those on a case-by-case basis. And to Kirsten's point, the opportunity cost that is happening by us not investing in education and how many businesses are not coming here, how many businesses are not staying here because they see that we're not investing in our education.
All right. Catherine.
Yes, I don't think it will scare away potential businesses from coming here for the reason that we have the most favorable taxes in Arizona for incoming corporations, and so by raising it, we'll only be up to par with the rest of the country. So I think that that won't necessarily scare a lot of people away, but on the other hand, it will attract them because that reinvested revenue will go into education and infrastructure, maybe the environment and the road systems. I think that we really need to look at the overall effect because trickle down just isn't working. It's never worked. And I think that we've seen the writing on the wall here. So I don't think it will impact us much.
All right. We've obviously talked a lot about school funding. Let's keep talking about schools for a little bit, but beyond the dollars and cents, Kirsten, do you have any ideas for a tangible way to improve outcomes for our K-12 public schools that don't require a new revenue stream or new funding or new dollars going to those schools?
Well, one of the biggest regrets and that I had about this past legislative session is that a bill that would have provided schools with flexibility for English language learners was held up by the Senate President and was not passed. And right now, I don't know how many of you realize it, but students for whom English is a second language, they must be in a classroom with other English learners for a 4-hour block of time. It's very inflexible. It's something that the legislature imposed many years ago, and all of the research shows that this is not a good way to teach students English. And those students are falling behind. They're not with other English speakers, and they're missing classes like science and math. We had an opportunity to change that, and we didn't do it. I think we have to stop being so restrictive in the Arizona legislature and let research run.
All right, and moving on to Nikki.
There we go. The function of our schools is to create the workforce of the future, right? To train our kiddos in a way that they're prepared for the workforce of the future, which we don't really have much of an idea what that's going to look like because technology is changing so rapidly. But I feel like if we can equip our teachers and our students with STEM, as a technologist, I'm a fan of STEM. A lot of our jobs are going in that direction. I think that will help prepare them for the future, and continuing to put money and investment in JTED for non-technical careers and all those different trades. I think those are going to be critical in preparing kids in a very broad way for the workforce of the future. And that wouldn't cost a lot of money because we're already doing it.
All right, thank you. Catherine.
Yes, so I think that there are ways to improve our education system because we're forced to without extra revenue. And I think one of those ways it's really important is to make education a community effort. All of us should worry about this and care about it, even those of us with kids that are grown up, like me. I think community partnerships, corporate partnerships should be investing in our education system. We should have, there's a system called, a program called Earn to Learn that a woman named Kate Hoffman created that requires that kids in junior high and high school work part-time, they earn and they get good grades, and they will match their college tuition for the money that they earn. And so I think the incentives like this, partnering with the Chamber of Commerce, partnering with corporations, partnering with Davis Mothin, with Raytheon, all of the big money earners in this city have a stake in education. And I think that's a way to take the burden and the onus off of maybe raising taxes or other revenues and putting the onus on the community and getting them more involved.
All right, thank you. Domingo.
One tangible way to increase the outcomes in K through 12 in a situation like we have now, where we have a definitely constrained budget, I believe is bringing educators to the table and asking them what they need in terms of flexibility to educate students. We have lots of schools throughout Arizona that are substantially different from one another, and the educators that are working in the classrooms know the most about their students, and they know the best ways to educate their students with what they have. So we need to give them a little bit more flexibility. We need to give them a voice at the table as far as determining the outcomes of how they educate their own students.
All right, thank you. Domingo, you just highlighted our teachers. There's been some excellent reporting in the Arizona Republic about teachers who are actually crossing state lines to find a higher salary. We'll start with Nikki for this question. What's a proposal beyond boosting pay for teachers? Since we've talked about funding a bit, beyond that, what are some ways you'd propose trying to retain more teachers and keep them in Arizona rather than fleeing to California or New Mexico or Utah?
Yeah, that's definitely one of our biggest challenges. My middle daughter gets very, very attached to her teachers, and she's had some turnover, and it's been really difficult for her and a lot of the other kiddos. So I understand how it's difficult on the children for the turnover, and also I can understand why the teachers are either leaving the profession because they're not getting paid as the professionals they are, or there's more money to be made elsewhere. From what I've read, the top 3 reasons that teachers are leaving the profession is teacher pay, overworking. They're working 70 and 80 hours a week, and a lack of respect in the classroom. So if we take the teacher pay out, I think it comes down to resources. Classroom sizes are very important, and just giving the teachers the support and resources that they need in the classrooms to make them feel like they can do it. And we have to get their hours down from 70 and 80 hours a week if we want to keep them here.
Thank you. Catherine.
Yes, so I would agree that we need to look at a comprehensive education reform. And I think the revenue that we could get from Invest in Ed and what the legislature should do to continue a longer-term sustainable way to fund education is really necessary because it all boils down to money. I mean, we can partner with the community and we can do a lot of creative things, but what the teachers need, in addition to their salaries, are schools that are safe, that are maintained, that have enough salaries and pay for counselors to take the burden off the teachers, to make the teachers feel safe. They also need more training, money for training these teachers, in addition to the supplies and all of the, we've heard all of the horror stories about teachers having to buy their own supplies. There's a lot of things that we could do, and it should not be piecemeal. We should look at this as a holistic way of funding education fully, not just through salaries. Because yeah, I've seen the ads. Texas actually has advertisements luring teachers to leave Arizona to come to Texas to teach. And that's just, it's embarrassing, and we need to change that. Thanks.
Thank you. Domingo.
We're not just losing teachers to other states, we're losing teachers to other countries where they can make a whole lot more money. And it terrifies me every time I talk to a teacher that is considering leaving the education field in Arizona, because I know these folks are dedicated, hardworking, and they love what they do. Beyond getting their salary on par with what they should have on the national average, we need to give them supports as far as supplies, school maintenance, support staff. These are all kind of the smaller intangible things that really go into making a job more bearable. And we know that these teachers will put in a lot of extra hours to do what they love, but I think it's our obligation as a community to give them the supports they need, the staff they need, the infrastructure they need, so they can go about doing that great job of educating our children. And they've done a fantastic job with really minimal resources. Let's give them the rest of what they need to put Arizona on top of the education system.
And Kirsten.
Well, you've really put your finger on a really big problem, and there's nothing sadder than talking to teachers who say that they have loved their career, but that they've told their own children not to go into teaching because they don't think that they can afford to have a family and yet live off a teacher's salary. I think it's a question of both financial help as well as giving them more power and authority to teach the way they think is best. One of the bills that I sponsored would have provided a stipend to teachers in our universities who committed to going into our public schools. And so long as they stayed and continued to teach for at least 3 years, they would continue to get that stipend. And research has shown if you keep a teacher teaching for 3 years, then they are more likely to stay, especially if you reward them financially after that. We have bills that I supported to provide for teachers to get graduate degrees, and finally to help them with classroom teacher supply expenses, another bill I did.
All right. So we don't yet know what the outcome of the election in November would be, but if the current trend holds, Democrats will be the minority party in each chamber, the House and the Senate. So what ways do you plan to establish a good working relationship with the other representatives and senators across the aisle so that some of these ideas could actually be a part of bills, of the budget, just a part of the legislative process? We'll start with you, Catherine.
Thank you. So I think one of the things that I would try to attempt with my fellow Democrats is not go it alone. I would want to march arm in arm with all of the other Democrats in all of the other legislative districts to Phoenix and form, small teams that would talk about the most pertinent issues, one of them being gun policy and the other one being education, because I feel like those are two issues that we have really common ground goals with. So I'd try to go towards the common ground issues like gun policy, safety. Our children are dying. We have mass shootings. How often? How many people are dying every day or being shot every day in Arizona, in our country? I think those are the issues that we have common ground, and I would go for those issues. Education, I can't believe that's not a top priority for the Republicans in Phoenix either. So I think that appealing to their greater sensibilities, to their moral obligations as parents, as people, and as human beings is what I would first start out with, but arm in arm with my fellow Democrats.
Domingo, how would you reach out across the aisle?
Well, a lot of that just is based on relationship building, and I've done in my work as an attorney, I often come up against lawyers that have completely opposing ideas to mine or to my clients, and what works best in that environment is spending time to get to know them so that you can build that relationship, so that you can have honest conversations. And that is part of the diplomacy that it takes to get bipartisan bills passed. You have to work across the aisle. You have to be willing to sit and listen and work through some issues. There are some issues where I have a pretty strong stance that I believe that the constituents of Tucson will not want me to waver, but others, it is more beneficial to be a negotiator and to be diplomatic to get a good resolution, the best resolution that's possible.
All right, thank you. Kirsten.
Yes, I have to agree that doing things informally, getting to know our Republican colleagues is really the best way to try to break through and make some progress. Probably the best thing I did to have a better relationship with the chair of the Environment Committee, I was actually the ranking member, was to attend his Apple Fest at his ranch in northern Arizona, and that provided something for us to talk about and laugh about, and it helped us in dealing with some of the difficult issues. I think I would also start with some issues that there's more common ground, I think, than gun control, and I think that would be criminal justice. There really does seem to be some real interest on both sides of the aisle for reducing our incarceration rate, which is 4th highest in the nation in Arizona, as well as water issues. Another area that we've had a lot of bipartisan success in the past, and I think that we could make a lot more. And from there, work on those harder issues.
All right, and Catherine. Oh, you know what? I'm sorry. We started with you for that one, so my apologies. So,
do I get to go?
Oh, I'm sorry.
That's okay.
That is your turn.
That's okay.
I'm losing track of things.
No. So I grew up in a really small town, 1,500 people population in rural America in the middle of the cornfields. So very conservative area of the country. My dad's a preacher. He also works in the above ground mining industry. So I come from a very conservative area of the country, and I understand the values of our conservative friends. I understand the motivations and the perspectives that they're coming from. Joining the military, traveling the world, a lot of my views evolved and changed over time. But I think that my ability to understand those values and build those relationships and find that common ground is one of my biggest strengths that I'll be able to bring to the legislature. And as Domingo said, it's all about relationship building and finding common ground, and that's something that I happen to be gifted at in my role in leadership and being a facilitator in the organization that I work in. So.
Thank you, Nikki. And we've had some conversation about this, and there's been a lot of interest in getting each candidate's position on 2 ballot measures in particular. So this is as close as we'll get to a yes or no question. So I'm going to give each candidate 30 seconds to answer these next 2 questions. Starting with Domingo, the Invest for Ed movement has put forward a proposal to increase the income tax rate on the 2 highest brackets in the state. It could draw an estimated, I want to say $650 million or so annually for education. Do you support the Invest for Ed ballot measure, and would you vote for it? 30 seconds.
Yes, I support Invest in Ed, and I also supported the Red for Ed movement. The reality that we have here in Arizona is that public education is severely underfunded, and the legislature that was previously in, all of them back at least 10 years, if not 20, have failed to fund public education. The citizens of Arizona have stepped up and said, this is what we want. Now it's a ballot measure. I support it. I will vote yes.
All right, thank you. And Kirsten?
Yes, I do support it. I think I mentioned that before. We need some immediate funds, and this is the way to do it. I do also think that it is fair and equitable. Right now, lower income persons are disproportionately using their income to support our education system through sales tax. We are very heavily reliant upon sales tax to support education, and we need to spread that burden out. And this is one way of doing so through the Invest in Ed initiative.
All right, thank you. And Nikki?
So the root cause is definitely a lack of prioritization among the legislature to make this happen, and citizens have had to take it upon themselves to fund education. I do support the Invest in Ed initiative. I do understand where the business community, what their perspective is and their concerns on reverse economic situation because of businesses leaving. But again, to go back to the opportunity cost, I think that there is too great of an opportunity cost. If we continue to refuse to invest in education, we will not be able to bring those businesses back.
All right, and lastly, Catherine.
Yes, I absolutely would support, and I've passed the petitions around. I marched with the Red for Ed movement. I teach at Pima Community College, but I would argue that the noblest of all professions are pre-K and K through 12 teachers in our country, and I think this is the least that we can do is try to get this initiative passed as a start. But I think there's a lot more that needs to happen, and we need to really look at that as an overarching, comprehensive plan for education. Thanks.
All right, and another measure that will be on the ballot for voters to decide this fall is Prop 305. This is the referendum of a law passed in 2016 that would, 2017, that would expand access to Arizona's empowerment scholarship accounts, commonly referred to as school vouchers, to all students, while also capping enrollment at roughly 30,000 students. So starting with Kirsten, do you want that law to stand, or do you want voters to reject it in the ballot? 30 seconds.
Yes, I want the voters to reject that. Expanding our school vouchers is not good for our public school system. It's taking taxpayer money out of our public schools, and it's shifting it to private and parochial schools. And at this point, we just can't afford to do that. Our existing voucher program is rather limited. It's designed to address the needs of students whose needs may not be met by our public school system, but that's not what the legislature did when they expanded vouchers universally. So we need to repeal this law. So vote no.
And Nikki.
I'll say it again, no on Prop 305. As my friends here have talked about, it would take millions of dollars out of public education. We cannot afford another dime to come out of public education. And not only that, but it takes away the priority opportunity for our military families, our special needs kiddos, and our foster care kids who currently have access to the current expansion, or I'm sorry, the current ESAs. So I strongly oppose Prop 305. Vote no.
Catherine.
I also would urge everyone to vote no on Prop 305. It's absolutely imperative that we look at the voucher system for what it is, what it was originally intended for, and this expansion would just throw all of that away. Clearly, the voucher system is working for those that are in need, but if you expand it, it's going to hurt the people that it was intended for. So please vote no on Prop 305.
All right, and finally, Domingo.
Vote no on Prop 305. The original idea behind the ESA came about 2011 when Jan Brewer signed it in to support children with disabilities getting equitable access to education. That was broadened out, as my colleagues have mentioned, to foster care, kids in foster care, children in military families. And what's going to happen is we have a strong likelihood that if 305 goes through, then those kids are going to lose priority in the system, and that is going to be a severe detriment. So I urge you to vote no on 305.
All right. Now we're going back to a minute per answer. Thank you for humoring me on that. And we're going to shift away from education, I think, because I'm going to give you an open-ended question. If elected as the representative in LD10, what's the first bill you would plan on introducing? And we'll start with Nikki.
Okay. There is an idea in Governor Ducey's school safety plan that I think is really solid. We have some problems, as we all know, with our background check system. And right now, if there's an issue, law enforcement has 40 days to report that incident to the system that goes into the background check, 40 days. And in this plan, that shortened that timeline down to 1 day. And I think that that's something that we can get a lot of bipartisan support on if we pull that out of the plan and just run with one particular issue. And that would make our background checks more efficient, more effective, and I think it would reduce people's access to getting guns that should not be getting guns because they're likely to cause harm to themselves or someone else. That would be the first thing.
All right. Thank you. Catherine.
The bill that I would propose initially would also be regarding gun policy and universal background checks, but I would propose that the universal background checks would be complete and thorough, and that would do away with any kind of gun show loopholes, any loopholes, period. I think this is a bill that would be easily supported by both sides of the fence because universal background checks have been approved by 96% of all Americans. They agree with that, but it's the loopholes and it's all of the other contingencies and it's also the wait periods and all of the other details that need to be worked out. So I would propose a very comprehensive universal background check bill if elected.
All right. Thank you. Domingo.
Choosing just one is going to be a tough task. But I would say that priorities as far as submitting bills, the first thing we have to do is make sure the public education is fully funding and make sure that we have a sustainable revenue stream. Second on the list is going to be as far as gun safety. If bump stocks are not already banned by that time, we need to make sure that Arizona bans them. We also need to introduce legislation that will hold gun owners liable if they fail to store weapons in a manner that allows people access to them that result in someone getting harmed. My big issue that I come from is from DCS, and I have a few ideas about making kids safer, reintroducing social supports for kids and families, for mental health, for substance abuse, and for stabilizing families that are in need. Thanks.
Thank you. And Kirsten.
This is a really difficult question. To only have
You only get one bill.
Okay, I adopt everyone else's bill that they were doing. And in addition, on this issue of criminal justice, I think the first bill I would introduce would be to defelonize the possession of the simple possession of drugs. Right now, we are spending literally millions of dollars to lock people up in jail simply for possession of drugs. And we're not talking about sales, we're talking about simple possession. And I think we are one of the few, maybe the only state for which this is a felony to possess marijuana. And once you get a felony on your record, it's very hard, it's almost impossible to get rid of, and it prevents you from getting a job, getting housing, supporting your family. So we could do a lot in the criminal justice realm.
One quick follow-up. When you say drugs, are you talking particularly about marijuana, decriminalizing possession of marijuana, or is that a larger umbrella? Are there other drugs that you also think the simple possession should be decriminalized?
I think we should look beyond marijuana, but I would start with marijuana.
All right, thank you. And we started with Nikki on that last question. I'm sorry, I keep on getting confused. So moving on to the next question, we've had a couple of cards come up to the front here talking about water conservation. Arizona's population is growing. We're seeing water levels in our reserves recede. From the legislature, Catherine, we'll start with you. What are some ways that you would propose to better conserve the state's water resources?
Yes, thank you. This is a really serious issue, and I think that a lot of people may be aware of that we are looking at a pending crisis within the next 2 years of a really serious water shortage. And we're looking at our use of the Colorado River, Lake Mead, Lake Powell, and the fact that we share this with our bordering states in the Southwest. I think that as a legislator, we need to look at combining our efforts to ensure that we continue to communicate with the other states, with our fellow legislators from other states as well, and look at the CAP and the commission that are involved with water conservation here. I think they have good intent, but I think as the legislature that it will be our job to ensure that we look and speak with them and are part of the discussion when they talk about what in the world is the plan going to be, like what is the specific plan. And I think that's the first step, is to find out what they're going to really do about this pending shortage.
All right, thank you. Domingo, water conservation.
Well, we need to act quickly based on the information that we have now about what our water levels are now and where they are forecast to be, and then build our plans around that. We've had plans in place for a long time for developers and for businesses about how much water they can use and how much water they have to plan for when a new development comes in. But we're facing a water shortage, so the reality is that some of those calculations are simply not working out. What we need to do in the short term is encourage everyone to be smart about water usage, conservation where we can, and then look at the ways that we are incentivizing folks to come in and build and make sure that their water plans are going to be in alignment with the water that we have and the water that we are projected to have. Thank you.
Thank you. Kirsten.
Yeah, there's a lot we can do on water. I mean, water is such a precious resource. We live here in the desert. It's really vital to our life and sustainability here, and yet we do not have a stable water future. So there's both issues dealing with groundwater and with our use of the Colorado River water. You may have caught a New York Times article this past Sunday about the unregulated pumping of groundwater in our rural areas. So we need to have management areas, even in our rural areas, just like we have here in Tucson and Phoenix, that restrict the unregulated pumping of groundwater, or we won't have a agricultural sector left. We also need to conserve our Colorado River water and use better practices. Most of that is being used for agriculture, and I think we could be a lot smarter about our agricultural use of water.
Thank you. And Nikki.
I actually was at the Watershed Management Group yesterday touring the Living Lab and learning all about water conservation, so it's great timing. But the number one feedback that I've gotten from a lot of my hydrologist friends, because I'm nerd and have a lot of hydrologist friends, is that we have to have a drought contingency plan. From my understanding, in Arizona, we have been one of the only states that hasn't got that taken care of. And with these pending shortages, we have to get a plan in place. And I agree with Representative Engel. We have to expand active management area to cover the entire state, because coming from rural America, I have a special place in my heart for the rural communities, and they are especially vulnerable to water shortages, since they rely exclusively on groundwater and they're having to drill deeper and deeper. And we need to make sure that those Arizona residents are protected and they have water sources into the future.
And so a key part of Arizona's future water sources is our relationship with neighboring states who also share water from the Colorado River. Domingo, there was a proposal that the governor was pushing this year that didn't get too far, but if Doug Ducey is reelected, I expect we'll see a second push for an effort to sort of shake up who represents the state when it comes to managing and negotiating with other states for those resources. Right now, the Central Arizona Project takes on a big part of that role. Do you think that should change? Do you think the administration, whoever's in the executive tower, should have a more active role in negotiating Arizona's water future?
I think we should definitely look at that and determine whether they are effective negotiators for Arizona. But remember that we have, looking at the distribution of water that comes through the Colorado River, we have not only the states, our bordering states, but tribes. And there are some agreements that go back a very long way that determine how much each state or each entity is allotted. I'm not familiar with the system enough to know whether CAP is the best negotiator. I know that Representative Engel has a whole lot more experience on that. So what I generally do is defer to the experts that can give a better opinion.
All right, thank you. And Kirsten?
Well, I would just say that Governor Ducey had that proposal, but it went exactly nowhere in the legislature this past term. I think everyone realized the Central Arizona Project Board is well respected, and it's an elected board. So it does represent the interest of the counties that have members on that board, and replacing that and shifting a lot of their power to a single person in the governor's office or to his appointee just really politicizes water. And we can't do that in Arizona. We haven't done that before. I think one of the reasons we've made sensible water policy is that we have diffused the power and we've tried not to make it a political issue. It's just too important. So I would hope that we don't return to that right now. CAP and the governor's office seem to be working together on the drought contingency plan that Nikki just mentioned, and I hope that progress continues.
All right, thank you. And Nikki?
I absolutely agree with Representative Engel, and a lot of the folks that I've talked to in the water community do as well. There's more comfort level with a board of elected people on the CAT board with differing opinions and agendas than a consolidation of power in the governor's office. So I would definitely lean toward not consolidating that to one person, and again, like as Representative Engel said, making that about politics, because it is a critical issue for us in our state.
All right, and Catherine?
Yes, so of course I agree with all of my colleagues here. This can't be politicized, because the fact is the commission has been tasked to look at a drought contingency plan, but we have to also remember that when we look at the bordering states that we share this water with, we are pretty much last in line to get this water. So we can't afford to make it political. We need to work together with our border states and with all the commissions that are tasked to look at a drought contingency plan. So I think it's really important that it's not consolidated into one person. We need to work across the board, not just in Phoenix, but with other states. When I lived in Africa, drought and water shortages was very serious. It was a life or death matter, and we worked very hard to build wells and to build up the communities in East Africa to make sure that they could survive. I don't think we realize here yet how serious this could get. So I think the other thing that we need to do is educate our populace to look at the future and start consolidating ourselves and looking at the way that we conserve waters personally and privately and amongst our businesses here in Tucson. Thanks.
All right. Kirsten, there is some concern here about the state of Tucson and LD10's infrastructure, road repair and maintenance and, new construction if needed. How would you propose to bring more funds to Southern Arizona to help support those infrastructure needs?
Well, I think the first thing I would do is stop the Arizona Legislature from sweeping the highway user funds, the HERF funds, which are generated through our gas taxes and are meant to be used on our roads. And yet, year after year after year, the Arizona Legislature has swept those funds to use it for other things, such as education. And so as a result, we have chronically sort of crisis situation with our roads. What we have done is also as a result is we've shifted really the financial burden of that to our local governments, which make them less able to respond to other needs. So we have Pima County that's now raising taxes for our roads. The city of Tucson is also doing that. So I think the responsibility rests with the state, and I would end those HERF sweeps.
All right. And Nikki.
Yeah, when you deconstruct this issue down to funding for our infrastructure, particularly roads, a lot of it is around the fact that we have these great fuel efficient and electric vehicles now, which are using less gas, which means that we're getting less revenue in from our gas taxes. So I think we really need to work together to come up with a longer term strategy, because we're going to continue to have better, more fuel efficient vehicles, more electric cars on the street. So this is going to continue to be a problem. So I prefer to try to look at the root cause and figure out what we can do. I know there are a lot of ideas out there. There are some in terms of looking at a registration fee when you register your vehicle that would kind of help offset some of those taxes that are not being collected from gas. So I think we need to really be open to looking at different ideas, look what other states have done, and come up with a more long-term solution as we're going to continue to collect less and less gas tax.
All right. And Catherine.
Yes, thank you. I think a lot of the infrastructure issues are very local. So any of us that drove to Saguaro High School from anywhere from Grant and Speedway knows what I'm talking about. It's a local issue. So I think I agree, sweeping the HERF funds and raising property taxes, you know, those are two ways of maybe getting more revenue to increase our infrastructure. But I also think that what we need, after talking to city councilors and the mayor's office and the local elected officials, I think the state needs to give a little bit more power and voice to city officials. And they need to help our city officials and let them make these decisions. Who knows better than the people that live here in Tucson, or let Phoenix make their own decisions up there in Phoenix and across the state. So I think there needs to be more power and more of a voice here locally in our local elected officials to help look at the infrastructure problem here in Tucson.
And Domingo.
The infrastructure of Arizona consists of a little bit more than roadways. We have highways, we have railways, we have telecommunication systems, and all of those need attention. The way to start bringing more money in, if we can't reallocate things like HERF funds, which we should be doing, we should be putting that money where it is intended to go. We need to start looking at having ways to attract business to the structure that we have as we improve it. There's really no magic bullet to this other than raising taxes, but I would rather look at bringing in more business to raise our revenue and having smarter ways to manage what we have. We know that the U.S. government is apparently not going to invest in infrastructure the way that it was that we were told that it was going to, so we can't rely on that. Arizonans are going to have to step up and figure out this problem ourselves and make it happen.
Nikki, our next question, I want to follow up on something you mentioned, possibly raising vehicle registration fees. That was actually something that was adopted as a part of the budget earlier this spring. Now, those funds aren't necessarily going to go to roads and highways. They're just going into the general fund as a kind of backdoor way to help support the general fund and help boost education. There was a lot of debate over whether or not raising a fee, which the legislature does with a simple majority vote, is an appropriate way to bring in new revenue and is necessarily fair to those who have vehicles versus those who don't. What are your thoughts on that fee in particular, and generally fees as a way of sort of bypassing increasing taxes?
You know, the way I look at it is we're all using the same roads. Some people can afford to buy a fuel-efficient vehicle or an electric car, and some people can't. So, but we're all consuming the product. And so I think that we need to figure out a way that we can kind of make that fair, that everyone who's using the road is helping to pay to maintain that. Because right now, from my understanding at the state level, we're just kind of in triage mode as things are falling apart. We're patching them back together, but we don't have a lot of money available to expand and build out infrastructure. And so I think we really need to look at the entire picture, especially moving forward, how we can do this in a way that, again, as we have more fuel efficient vehicles, how we can get ahead of that. And if it's a fee at registration, if there's another way, I know there's a lot of different ideas, so I think we just need to be open to figuring out what we can do together and address this issue.
And Catherine, thoughts on fees and if that's the appropriate way to boost revenue?
I think to boost revenue, you have to look at everything. It can't come from one source. So increasing fees, if it's manageable and if it's not completely unfair, I think that's something that should be looked at, and we need to do those numbers. But I also think if we're talking about infrastructure and improving in the long-term fashion, Arizona is quite behind the rest of, well, a lot of states in our country when it comes to mass transit. And I think that would also take the burden off of our road systems for people that can't afford fuel-efficient cars to get to work and to get to places or to get from here to Phoenix. I think our mass transit system, whether it is by bus or train or maybe even some type of an elevated subway system, I think this is something we really need to look at in the long term, and people keep talking about it, but if we don't start now and start making plans, it's never going to happen for us here in Arizona.
And Domingo.
I'm not convinced that a vehicle registration fee, an increase in those, is going to sufficiently cover all of the costs that we need to take care of our road infrastructure. We are going to have to look at other aspects of our budget to make sure that we have safe roads that businesses can use, that our citizens can use, that are not going to cause excessive wear and damage to vehicles, which are just another cost as part of driving here. We can certainly look at fees, but making them equitable and making them fair is going to be a primary goal of that fee.
All right. Kirsten.
Yes, we increased the new vehicle registration fee on all vehicles, and there was problems with that, you know, through and through. One of the problems is that we took away the lower amount that is paid by people who own alternative vehicles, battery cars, plug-in vehicles, and I think that was a mistake. We need to address climate change, and climate change is being fueled and exacerbated by the burning of fossil fuels. This was one way of incentivizing people to buy cleaner vehicles, and right now we have such a small population of those electric cars. I don't really think that subsidy was really having a big impact on the roads. It was also a very regressive way of raising money because people need cars to drive in Arizona, and instead of raising money through something like corporate income taxes, we're essentially sort of adopting a sales tax-like vehicle to raise more tax money through this vehicle registration fee. So I didn't think that was the best way to go about raising revenues.
All right. Catherine, there have been efforts the last 2 years. There's a growing consensus from groups on the right and the left that there is a need for what's defined in broad strokes as criminal justice reform. I want to boil down to that a little bit more specifically. We've mentioned a couple of times here lowering incarceration rates in Arizona. There's some specific proposals to do that, things like sentencing reform, lowering certain criminal penalties. We've heard decriminalization of marijuana, perhaps other drugs. Is there anything that you would support in this realm of criminal justice reform when it came to a vote in the legislature?
I think first and foremost that there should not be privatized prisons. I think that any time an organization, a company, is looking at making money based on how many criminals they can get, it's just contradiction in our very core values. So I think we need to get rid of the privatized prison system. It's racist and it's corrupt. There are known to be elected officials in Phoenix who actually own some type of stock in these privatized prisons. So how is that not a conflict of interest? So I think that's one of the big things that we would do. Another thing that I would look at is those that are in prison and are certifiably imprisoned, incarcerated for a crime, and justice was served. I think the recidivism rate needs to be looked at, and reform needs to happen as far as prison reform needs to happen as far as making the prisoners that are there that are incarcerated don't come back by applying different kinds of programs like employment programs, self-improvement, counseling, ways to go back into the society. Thank you.
Thank you. And Domingo.
We need to understand that our current incarceration system is incredibly expensive, and there are other states that have figured out ways to lower their rates of incarceration, raise their rates of reentry into the communities in positive ways, and lower recidivisms. The Arizona Legislature just has to want to. I completely support criminal justice reform. I support things like adding mental health services and supports, and adding community supports once folks are released. We know that released back into the community, you have to have some supports there, because a lot of times some folks that get into criminal trouble, they got into that spot because they didn't have a lot of supports in the first place. On the long term, what I would like to see is, instead of an education to prison pipeline like we have now, I want to go education to employment pipeline, and really set up our kids and the folks in our community to be employed and be productive and be great members of our community.
Thank you. And Kirsten.
Yes, this is an issue that I've been working a lot on as a result of being on the Judiciary Committee, and it's one where I think we really truly can make some real progress because there is real bipartisan support for this. Starting with defelonizing certain drug possessions, starting with marijuana. I think there's a lot of support for that, and that itself would reduce our incarceration rate right there. We also should look at Arizona's truth in sentencing law. This is something that Arizona passed back in the 90s because there was federal money attached to it, and requires anyone serving a felony sentence to be in jail for 85% of their sentence. In most other states, it's 55 to 60 years. So those long prison sentences are expensive. They really remove people from their communities and from the prospects of a job. And I don't think that it's reducing our criminal rate, because we have such a high recidivism rate in Arizona. Also, we have to look at expungement, possibilities of sealing criminal records for nonviolent offenders when they demonstrate that they are really taking seriously entering into a new life.
All right. And Nikki.
I recently reviewed a project that some of my classmates put together, and they called it a joint venture. It's about marijuana. And basically they wanted to amend ARS 13-3405 to designate marijuana possession as a misdemeanor instead of a felony, as Representative Ingalls said it's currently a felony. And just to put some numbers behind what my friends are talking about here, some 2018 numbers, there were 3,841 inmates incarcerated for minor drug offenses at $68.55 a day. That's $96,104,700. That could be going to education if we wanted to look at decriminalization of these minor drug offenses. So I think we really need to strongly look at that and look at how we could reinvest those funds into prevention, and also focus on rehabilitation of our inmates and reducing that overall recidivism.
All right. We now have time for some individual questions. We're running a little bit long, so I'm going to give our candidates 1 minute each to answer these questions, and to let the other three know, if you do have something to add on the topic, just wave your hand and I'll give you 30 seconds to chime in as well. Our first question is for Domingo. We talked a lot about K through 12 funding. Would also like to hear a little bit about higher education, specifically our community colleges. The state budget does not provide funds at this time for community colleges. Is there a way to remedy that, or generally to boost funding for those schools?
Yes, there is a way to remedy that, and what we have to have is the will to do it, the courage to do it. What we need in Arizona, not only a strong K through 12 system where our kids can come through primary and secondary school with a great education, but we also need options after high school, and that can either be going into trades, technical programs. We know that STEM is a huge part of the growing economy, but also into college and postgraduate. And I believe that we need to look at making college as free or nearly free as we can, because if we are going to be a leader of the country in terms of the folks that we have in Arizona that have great educations and can be leaders in their fields and be a place where companies want to come here because we have the best trained folks, we need to pay attention to post K through 12 education. I believe we can make it happen.
And last chance, anyone else want to add about community colleges? I saw Catherine first.
Yes,
seconds.
I think that it's imperative that we try to get funding back into the community colleges, because these are students that may or may not be able to get into or afford the U of A or any other state education systems in our state. And the fact is that these are students of all ages. These are young adults and older adults. I get students of all ages that are looking to better their lives, whether it's STEM, whether it's liberal arts, whether it's a vocation. The vocation programs in Pima Community College are extraordinary, and it's a win-win to provide these students with a means to contribute to society and contribute back into our economy.
All right, thank you. And 30 seconds, Kirsten.
Are you just focused on community colleges? Or?
Yes.
Okay, community colleges. Well, I'm a real supporter of community colleges. They're really the backbone of our higher education system. They're doing a fabulous job. They truly are training people for careers. And I think it's really terrible that we have withdrawn all state funding from community colleges. They are affordable, and they're doing a great job, and we need them. Right now in Tucson, new businesses are coming in, and we need to do import workers from Phoenix to staff a lot of those jobs, because we do not have the trained workers here in Tucson for the positions that are needed.
All right. And Kirsten, our next focused question is for you as well. There have been cuts to the Department of Revenue in recent years that have led to a reduction in the number of auditors that the state provides to see if we're bringing in enough revenue or we're bringing in the right amount of revenue, from businesses and individuals. There was a little bit of a backtracking on that in this year's budget, a little bit more money for new auditors. Did that go far enough? Is there still a need for more funds for the Department of Revenue to make sure our collections are where they should be?
Absolutely. I see that as just a straightforward giveaway to corporations by cutting the number of corporate auditors in our Department of Revenue. I mean, how obvious can you get? If you don't have auditors, the corporations don't have to worry about paying their corporate income taxes. So I think, I can't remember what the ratio was of each corporate auditor and the amount of money that they brought in that these corporations owe our state, but it was significant. And the cut of something like over 70 of these auditors, we need to bring those folks back. We need them. Otherwise, it's just like relaxing our corporate tax laws. It's kind of an underhanded way of repealing our corporate taxes. So I would like to hire all of those auditors back.
Anyone else? Yes, Catherine.
I just want to add that this is precisely why we're in the position we're in today. The chipping away at our budget by allowing for corporate tax exemptions and cuts without being audited and without being corrected because we don't have enough auditors is added greatly to the position we're in right now. So I would definitely try to get that funding back.
All right. Our next question is for Nikki. This is a kind of a philosophical question, excuse me. Is it the function of our K through 12 public schools to produce our future workforce. We talked a lot about attracting businesses to Arizona by ensuring that there is going to be a local workforce in the future that is well educated coming out of our schools, or is it more so the mission of our schools to produce good functioning citizens?
I agree that I think that's both. And also it's the parents' responsibility. My kids are pretty spoiled because they have two techno-nerd parents, so they have access to all kinds of technology and resources that not every kiddo has access to, which is why I focus on making sure that they're job ready. But I also agree that critical thinking is something that's really important. I was at a restaurant the other day and they ran out of ketchup and they said, "I'm sorry, we're not gonna have ketchup until tomorrow," when they deliver the supplies, and I didn't know why they didn't just run down to Fry's and get some ketchup. So critical thinking is really important to being successful on the job and in life. So I would say both.
All right. Any other thoughts from our candidates on that one? All right. Then our last focus question is for Catherine. There have been efforts legislatively, though they've never gone far, and most recently at the ballot in 2016 to legalize marijuana recreationally. Right now, though, it's still legal medically. Is there anything within that program that you'd like to work on to improve? Knowing, of course, it takes a 3/4 vote of the legislature to change anything about our medical marijuana laws. Is there something that you'd like to and you think you could accomplish as far as a reform there?
Yes, absolutely. I think I would like to accomplish some reform regarding marijuana laws. I think that most legislators, both Republican and Democrat in Phoenix, kind of see the writing on the wall. It's been going on in several states, medically and both recreationally. And I think that we could look at, I would urge fellow legislators, also both Republican and Democrat, to look at the models that are used, that we can use as an example in Colorado, in Washington State, in California, in Maine, and see the lessons learned, where they failed and where they succeeded on several levels. One, using taxing marijuana and using that tax money to fund education, for instance. The fact that service members are dying, 26 service members are killing themselves, committing suicide every day, most of those with a gun, and most of those suffering from PTSD, most of those who are addicted to opioids. So as an alternative to opioid addiction, marijuana would serve a purpose. But also, just looking at all of the other states, I think the writing's on the wall, and I think I would urge fellow legislators to look at that.
Candidates, any other thoughts on our medical marijuana program and possible improvements? All right. Well, that concludes our questions for the night. We're now going to have 2 minutes each for closing remarks. We'll start with Domingo.
As we talked about today, there are a lot of ways that Arizona can be improved, and a lot of ways that the Arizona legislature has been failing our children and our families. When I was 17, I got my pilot's license, and that was the first time that it really came home to me the responsibility of that task, that if I messed something up, I could kill not only myself, but kill some of the people that were with me. When I became an attorney, that responsibility carried through to representing families, representing kids, that when that kind of trust is put in you and that kind of weight is put upon your shoulders, you just don't screw it up. And I believe that that weight should be in every one of our legislators, that when voters put their trust in you, you do not mess it up, period. What Arizonans want for our state is a healthy place that has good schools and that is a safe place. These are some of the goals that Arizonans value, and these are the goals that I am happy to work for. My dad, he was able to touch a lot of people in his life and make a big impact, and I feel that part of my job is to not only be worthy of his name, but try to continue to grow it. And I am uniquely poised at this time in my life to be extremely effective in the legislature. I know the law, and I know what needs to be fixed. I'm asking for your vote. My name is Domingo de Gracia. Thank you.
Kirsten.
Well, it's been a tremendous honor to serve this district in the legislature. I don't know if you can tell, but I love this job. It's exciting, and it is really exhilarating to be able to fight for the things that people tell you about that are broken, such as our education system. such as our lack of strong environmental protections here in this beautiful state of Arizona, such as many of the issues that we've talked about, criminal justice, investment in solar energy, renewable energy, improving our economy. There's just so many things that I think Arizona could be doing better on, and yet we're not. I've been honored to have the endorsements of many fine organizations, the Arizona Education Association, the Arizona Nurses Association, the Sierra Club, Planned Parenthood, the AFL-CIO, the Realtors Association. But most important to me has been the endorsements I've been getting at the door when I tell people about what I've been working on and what I'd like to do in my next term in office. I think all four of us on this stage, we have been working to improve the district. No matter what happens as the outcome of this election, I know all four of us will continue to work for this district. So good luck with your work in terms of voting. I think, as you can see, there's all four people up here very passionate about what we feel and what we'd like to do to help our community. Thank you.
Next up is Nikki.
Well, if you're here, you probably understand how critical 2018 is for us. And I like to give this analogy because I worked in a weather squadron for a year, and I thought tech people were nerds until I worked with weather people. But I learned a lot about weather. And right now, you know, we talk about the blue wave, but right now I kind of look at it as a tropical depression, and it's really depressing sometimes. But it's really up to us to harness that energy and that potential and push everything through 2018, through 2020. So it's really on us as candidates to inspire everybody, and you all for being here today and being out knocking on doors and canvassing and making phone calls and supporting us. It's so important up and down the ballot. On Saturday, we have a canvass with a U.S. Senate candidate, a CD2 congressional candidate, an Arizona Corporation Commission candidate, myself, and a Superior County Clerk candidate. So it doesn't get more up and down the ballot than that. And we're all coming together just to show the importance of getting as many Democrats elected as possible. I also feel like I'll bring a unique perspective, a unique position with the technology background. We have a lot of opportunity and a lot of risk, especially around our election systems, as we all know about, that we could really use another strong technology voice, as well as a facilitator and a results-oriented, solution-oriented person. So I look forward to your support. I am a clean elections candidate, so I don't need any money, but I would love to have your support through this election and any support with volunteering. And I want to officially let everyone know that no matter who of us gets through the primary, I will be out with my sneakers the very next day knocking on doors, because you guys have a really, really tough job, because I love each and every one of these guys. So have fun picking. You get two.
All right, and finally, Catherine.
Great. Thank you so much, Arizona Clean Election Commission. And again, Saguaro High School, this is a great auditorium. And my fellow candidates, it is overwhelming to be amongst a group of individuals that push the progressive Democratic agenda. And I think it's really important that you all are here. Clearly, by your well-articulated questions, and clearly by the people whose doors I've knocked on, close to 6,500 in the last few months, I see that people are engaged, they're energized, they care, they're worried, and I think that this is a year that we all understand is important. We are in, I would argue, a crisis. So thank you for being here, and thank you for caring, thank you for being passionate, and I've seen it all across this district. There are a lot of people out there that are worried and that are looking for some type of hope and something to believe in. The good news is that we're still a democracy. The good news is that we've got candidates all across the nation. 35,000 women across the nation are now running for office for the first time. You've heard names like Stacey Abrams and Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez. You've heard about my colleague in Kentucky, Amy McGrath. This is amazing. That's good news too. The other good news is that there's hope. 2020 is around the corner, and with all of you and all of the people in this district, in this state, in this country rising up, we talked about all the marches, this can happen. So folks, there's two things that need to happen, really, two. One of them is we need to flip the state. We need to win this state. We need to win this district and every other district in Arizona. That's one. The second thing is, once we win, we need to make change happen. And we need to put people into office, whether it's one of us, it'll be two of us, two of us, we need to get, like Nikki and Kirsten and Domingo said, we need to get back behind them, because this is not over. This is the beginning, though. It is the beginning of a wave, and really it comes down to those two things. So thank you for your time. I would love to apply my ambassadorial skills and my military skills that I've gained over the years, and go to Phoenix and fight for everybody. Thank you.
All right. Yeah, please. Thank you to our candidates. All right. And audience, if you'll bear with me for just a second, I have a few things to add on at the end here. First, thank you for taking the time to come out and participate in this debate and get a little bit more informed, we hope, about the Democratic candidates for the House in Legislative District 10. We encourage you, please visit www.azcleanelections.gov/voter dashboard. You can find a more customizable experience to find out more about the candidates and find out more about the election there. Also, you might have seen there's a evaluation form that you were handed today, or you can find it online. Please fill that out and return it to one of our volunteers. This helps us shape debates in the future, in the next election cycle. We're always looking to improve these, so we really appreciate your feedback about the commission and the importance of these debates. One last thing too, there is, as we mentioned at the beginning, a voter registration table at the back. So if you came here just curious about voting and want to actually get out there and do it now, please go to the table and they'll help out. Once more, thank you all for coming tonight. You're welcome to stick around. The candidates will hopefully stick around as well to talk to you, and you can get a little bit more one-on-one interaction. That's it. Thank you.